Welcome to another video from OptaTube. Today, we're going to plug into one of the biggest yet most invisible revolutions of our time, the complete teardown and rebuilding of how we all buy and sell electricity. Right? It's a great question. For the longest time, getting power was super simple, kind of like getting water from the tap. But that whole world, it's basically gone. We're going to break down exactly what happened, why it happened, and most importantly, what it all means for your wallet. So let's rewind and look at the before picture. Just imagine one single giant company in your area that owned it all. The power plants making the juice, the huge transmission lines carrying it, the local poles and wires, they even sent you the bill. They had total end-to-end control. Yeah, this whole setup is called a vertically integrated utility. You can kind of think of it like a big pyramid. At the very top, you have the power generation, and it all flowed down to you at the bottom, the customer, with one company managing every single step. It was simple, it was predictable, but as you're about to see, it wasn't exactly the most efficient way to do things. So by the time we got to the late 20th century, governments and economists started looking at this old model and thinking, there has to be a better way. There was this growing belief that if we could just inject a little bit of competition into the system, we could solve some really big problems. And it really boiled down to three huge reasons. First up, efficiency. The thinking was, hey, if power plants actually have to compete against each other to sell their electricity, they'll be forced to get smarter and bring their costs down. Second, investment. Building new power plants is crazy expensive, and governments really wanted to get private companies to help foot the bill for new infrastructure. And finally, choice. Why shouldn't you get to choose a provider that gives you a better price or maybe offers 100% green energy? Okay, so to really get a feel for the difference this makes, just talking about it isn't enough. We've got to see it in action. So let's look at a little simulation that puts the old monopoly model head-to-head with a new competitive market. And this is where it gets really interesting. So on one side, you've got the monopolist. It's just one seller, and they can basically set whatever price makes them the most money. And they often do that by holding back supply, which, you guessed it, keeps prices high. Then on the other side, you have the competitive market. Here, you've got lots of different power plants all bidding against each other, and the price gets set naturally, right where supply meets demand. So what happens when these two go head-to-head? In our simulation, the monopolist, who's just trying to maximize its own profit, cranks the price way up to a steep 120 euros per megawatt hour. It holds back supply to keep its margins fat, and customers have no choice but to pay up. Ouch. But now, watch what happens when we flip the switch to the competitive market. Boom. With all those generators bidding to sell their power, the price plummets to just 59 euros per megawatt hour. That's less than half the monopoly price. It's a perfect illustration of just how powerful competition can be. And look, this is the really important part. That huge price drop isn't just some number on a screen. That's real money that stays in your pocket instead of going to the power company. Economists have a fancy term for this. They call it consumer surplus. But really, it just means more value for you, the customer. Now, this wasn't just some academic theory. This idea totally took off and sparked a movement all over the world. Countries everywhere began the really complicated job of breaking up their old monopolies to build these new competitive power markets. So how did this whole thing actually roll out? As you can see, this definitely didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn. It all started with these bold experiments back in the 80s. Then it became official policy in the 90s. And by the 2000s, countries were even trading power across their borders. And what's really cool here is seeing how the challenge keeps changing. First, it was about creating competition, then about handling renewables. And now, it's all about data and smart tech. Let's take a look at the US, for example. There isn't one single market, but more of a patchwork of these large regional ones. In those markets, the day-to-day cost of electricity is really sensitive to things like the price of natural gas and, how windy or sunny it happens to be. Now let's fly over to Australia, where you see a totally different flavor. They've got one big national electricity market, and because they have so much solar power, especially on people's rooftops, prices can literally crash in the middle of a sunny day. Plus, their market settles every 5 minutes, which means prices can be incredibly volatile. It's a wild ride. And in Japan, we see yet another model. Their national exchange has historically been dominated by fossil fuels and hydropower. But now they're right in the middle of this massive transition, trying to figure out how to weave a growing amount of renewables into that traditional system. It just goes to show you this whole liberalization thing looks a little different everywhere you go.
Okay, so after decades of this global experiment, what's the verdict? Did breaking up all those monopolies actually deliver on its promises? Well, as with most big ideas, it's a little complicated. Let's break down the key lessons we've learned.
So we've definitely gained efficiency, but that has sometimes come with more volatile prices, which can mean bigger swings in your monthly bill. We've learned you can't just unleash the market and walk away. You absolutely need strong regulators to keep things fair and, to keep the lights on. But the biggest win has probably been the explosion of innovation, everything from giant batteries to smart thermostats. And maybe the most exciting part is this rise of the prosumer, where regular people with solar panels can become both producers and consumers of power. How cool is that? We've really just scratched the surface today. So, if you're interested in energy markets, power system modeling, and want updates and insights about the global energy landscape, you should definitely follow the OptaTube YouTube channel. And all this brings us to our final thought. The first revolution was about breaking up the monopoly. But now, with millions of solar panels and electric cars plugging into the grid, it makes you ask, is the next, maybe even bigger power market revolution already happening right now? Something to think about. Thanks for watching.